I don't think you can expect politicians to stop playing politics, and Justin Trudeau is no exception to that rule. It is a very, very serious measure to expel a diplomat, to leak out the name of that diplomat. It is undiplomatic behavior. India is also looking to open up the debate to say, let's look at all the Canadian diplomats that are here and what kind of role they had. It does seem like a declaration of diplomatic war. If India was not taking the concerns seriously enough, then why did they not wait until they had concluded their investigation? Prime Minister himself does not say, we have conclusively proven, or here is the evidence. The Prime Minister says, there are credible allegations that we are pursuing. India and Canada did not have normal political relations at all. And the issue between the two countries has consistently been on the Khalistani issue, on the idea that India worries about its national security and about violent acts being carried out here or being propagated from another country. The problem does seem to have become a little personal at the top.
Diplomatic tensions between India and Canada seems to be getting worse. In fact, in latest news that's come in, we understand that India has suspended visa services for Canada. And this after Canada had expelled a senior Indian diplomat. And of course, India too returned the favor right after. To understand what started this controversy, what we can make out of what's happening, and how this could pan out, I'm being joined by Suhasini Haidar, who is the diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu and a leading voice on international relations in India. Suhasini, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the News Minute.
If you could just tell our viewers how this started, because the murder of Nijjar was in June. And the statement of Trudeau in the Canadian Parliament was just last week. So there was a gap of 3 months. What, according to you, prompted this, and what do you make out of the timing?
Well, certainly there are many reasons that could be proffered for the timing. One is certainly that on the Canadian side, what they're trying to say is that while the assassination or the killing of Nijjar, who's a wanted terrorist from India, took place in June, uh, Canadian security officials, national security officials had actually taken their concerns that so-called Indian government agents were involved. Two national security advisor here, as well as in bilateral meetings, and then of course between Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in on the sidelines of the G20. They met on September the 10th. So this is as far as the Canadian side says is the timing, and then because they felt, according to the Canadian ambassador to the UN, that it wasn't being taken as seriously as they had hoped by the Indian side, that the Prime Minister of Canada went public with it. Now, of course, there are many questions to be asked in all of this. The fact is that if India was not taking the concerns seriously enough, then why did they not wait until they had concluded their investigation rather than go for this kind of public announcement in a parliament where the Prime Minister himself does not say, we have conclusively proven, or here is the evidence. The Prime Minister says there are credible allegations that we are pursuing. Not just that, Canada decides to expel an Indian official, a senior diplomat from Ottawa, also to reveal the name of the official done. This is not really diplomatic practice, because what it does is it puts a target on the back of that diplomat. It also puts other Indian diplomats, worries them if this is going to be the kind of behavior. Now, of course, India has matched all of that tit for tat. India also expelled a Canadian diplomat. India has summoned and demarched the Canadian High Commissioner. India has put out a travel advisory against Indians traveling to Canada, telling them, please watch out, especially if you're going to these areas in Canada where it's clear that the government is enabling this kind of hate speech and violence. When it comes to the timing, you have to ask, sure, it is possible that this is where the investigation is. But if the investigation has taken place and reached a conclusive end, then why is that evidence not more openly known? And secondly, if it hasn't reached that conclusive end, then why was action already taken by the Canadian government. That really has prompted the current crisis in the ties between them.
Which brings me to the next question. How much of their domestic politics is really a factor in all of this? Because Justin Trudeau, I understand, is not faring too well in the ratings, and the opposition had him cornered. The Canadian press also didn't, they weren't kind to him during his visit to India. He was mocked quite a bit. How much has all of these played a role, in your opinion?
Look, I don't think you can expect politicians to stop playing politics, and Justin Trudeau is no exception to that rule. I don't think, however, that we should look at bilateral relations and what has really now become a crisis in diplomatic ties between India and Canada as a factor of what Canadian domestic politics are. We certainly all do know that there is a sizable population in Canada of the Indian diaspora, of which there is a Sikh diaspora, of which there are some who do demand a separate state in India. And many of them do have political connections. Many of them are even in the government, in alliance with Mr. Trudeau. Many of them are his political rivals. So I find this part of the debate a little difficult to follow, because eventually Canadian domestic politics is for Canada. It is about the impact that the Prime Minister of Canada is having on the relationship between India and Canada through the sort of allegations he has made, and how India is going to respond to that. Eventually, as I said, I don't think any, and especially in these populous times, that any leader is without a certain domestic constituency being addressed through their foreign policy moves. But that's not India's real concern. India's concern is one about national security, is one about the idea that separatist forces, particularly those propagating violence, exist and are getting some kind of shelter, backing in other countries, that wanted criminals, people who are wanted for crimes in India, are not being extradited by countries that India has been calling its partner and has been working the relationship with. And the last point I really must make is, yes, at this particular moment, Justin Trudeau is the prime minister. Justin Trudeau, as you said, does have these domestic difficulties. He does have his popular ratings may be down. But this is not some 1 month or 2 months of the relationship between India and Canada. From the 1980s, late 70s actually, till about 2015, India and Canada did not have normal political relations at all because of this issue. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2010 went to Canada, the first prime minister to go in decades, for a multilateral event. He didn't go for a bilateral. Prime Minister Modi then decided in 2015 to go to Canada, the first prime minister of India to travel to Canada for a bilateral visit since 1973. These are not normal relations. And these have not been. And the issue between the two countries has consistently been on the Khalistani issue, on the idea that India worries about its national security and about violent acts being carried out here or being propagated from another country. Now, I can ask the question: how come India-Canada relations have actually been on a fairly good keel when it comes to people-to-people ties, educational ties, visas, professionals going from India to Canada? All of that has been allowed to continue. But the political relationship between the two countries has not been normal. So, yes, we can talk about this particular moment, the awkwardness that we all saw at the G20 between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Trudeau, the kind of statements that came out from both sides at the end of that meeting, making it very clear that both sides had a very acrimonious talk. At that time, they did not tell us that Mr. Nijjar was the reason for the acrimony, but the acrimony was there to be seen. And then, of course, the disastrous visit that Mr. Trudeau had in PR terms to India during the G20, those are all part of the equation right now. But I don't think we can just focus on the reason for what has happened in this moment and just do away with what is decades old history between the two countries.
That having said, without putting out any credible evidence, although you did say that it might have surfaced in the talks with Prime Minister Modi, talking about just credible allegations and expelling a senior diplomat, does that seem like a measured reaction to you?
Look, this is just it. That's where I think we have not yet got full clarity. The Canadians are not giving it, and certainly the government is also only giving as much information as it thinks is necessary at a certain time. So I think it's necessary to remember that yes, it is a very very serious measure to expel a diplomat, to leak out the name of that diplomat. It is undiplomatic behavior, and it certainly does seem excessive if Canada does not have conclusive proof of what they are alleging. Now, when it comes to the crime itself, one can ask many questions. There are other countries whose nationals have been killed in Canada. This was, after all, a Canadian citizen. He was part of all kinds of activities, political activism, if you like to call it that, but really propagation of a separatist movement in Canada. There are still questions being raised in India about what was the nature of the killing, who was behind the killing. Could it have been a local sort of a killing as well without Indian backing? Those are all things that have to come out. And yes, I think it's excessive to carry out these actions if you don't have conclusive proof. Now, one of the other questions one has to ask is Canada is not just another country. It is a member of the NATO alliance, the Western alliance. Canada is part of what is called Five Eyes with the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Every bit of information that any of these five countries has is very closely monitored by all of them. If there was this kind of threat of an Indian government plot, if you like, that's what they're alleging, or saying they have credible allegations of, to carry out an act of violence in Canada, it is clear that that would have been disseminated through the Five Eyes Alliance to the partners as well. So a lot of the answers to the questions we're asking right now might unravel in the next few weeks, maybe from Canada, maybe from some of the other countries involved. But the real question is going to be the impact on the bilateral relationship between India and Canada.
Speaking of the other countries involved, I think Australia and the US have given a statement which I don't know what to make out of much because it's kind of neither here nor there. They've expressed concerns and they've said they're aware of the allegations. How do you read this?
Well, certainly, I think the fact that they're saying that there are serious concerns about the allegations, I think the U.S. has now made it clear that they're not just saying that they're unclear about the allegations. In fact, I think there was a statement made by the spokesperson for the NSC, Adrian Watson, really saying the US was not walking back or walking away from these allegations. They're serious allegations. They need to be fully investigated. The US, the UK, and Australia have actually issued statements almost asking India to take part in the investigation as well, or to cooperate in this investigation. And Australia went a step further and said, we have conveyed our concerns to the Indian government. So what it means is what we were surmising right now has already happened in terms of other members of the Five Eyes Alliance have also reached out. We don't know about New Zealand yet, but they've also reached out to the Modi government and expressed concern, said, let's try and sort this out. Let's try and get a full investigation done. We have to keep the medias of all the countries outside of it, because eventually that's media commentary. And we are looking at a situation where actually every one of these countries, as you pointed out, is being a bit ambiguous, is being a little less than clear on what exactly they're saying and how exactly they see the evidence that has been proffered before them. If there is no evidence at all, then why are they calling the allegations serious and not siding with what India has said, which is that the allegations are absurd and without basis? So I think we do need to wait and see. It's a tough one to say, but in diplomatic terms, it always is a little below the surface as to exactly what has already been shared or and is already under play or underway, if you like. And I think finally we do have to also ask the question as to why relations between India and Canada have suddenly unraveled this way. I think that was one of the questions you had asked earlier. Remember, this is part of an investigation, this one into the killing of Nijjar, and now Canada has made those allegations public in its parliament. But in June, when the killing happened, before that, there had already been a different, investigation that Canada had started on foreign interference in Canada's domestic politics and in the elections process. And the Canadian National Security Advisor, in I think early June, so a few weeks before Nijjar's killing, had already said India is among the countries that is trying to interfere in Canadian domestic politics and elections. She named India along with China, which of course is it has there's been other trouble between Canada and China over this issue, as well as Russia and Iran, and said these four countries have government agents that are working here, that their embassies have people who are actually interfering in domestic politics. So there's a lot of unraveling going on. Then you look at the trade relationship, because they have a bilateral trade of I think $10 billion, but Canadian pension funds have about $20 billion in Indian area. So that kind of relationship is also being frayed at this moment, because we're seeing, for example, the trade talks have been put on pause. A trade mission that was meant to come from Canada to India has been cancelled. And as you pointed out, there are now issues that have become consular as well in terms of what's happening at the High Commission.
How have the reactions been in Canada? I do understand the opposition have they've asked Trudeau to provide more evidence, but that said, they all seem to be speaking the same language, taking the same tone as Trudeau. So what are the reactions you've seen coming in there?
Well, I think there was an initial reaction because what it seems is Mr. Trudeau took the leaders of the three or four other parties aside before he made his statement and actually conveyed to them at least the intelligence concerns about India's involvement in alleged involvement in this killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. We heard also from each of those political party leaders, including Pierre Poilievre as well as Jagmeet Singh. And in Parliament, they said that they will lock arms with the Canadian government on an issue of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security. However, after it happened, and as you pointed out, Pierre Poilievre um, then went and had a press conference where he questioned the nature of the evidence, that more needs to be told, and also said that Justin Trudeau has to come out and be open about what he's accusing India of and what the evidence shows. There have been other reactions. We've seen Canadian newspapers, some of them taking the allegations to the next level, doing exposés, if you like, about what they see as attacks inside Canada. But at the end of the day, and actually, there are a lot of commentators within Canada also asking tough questions of their own government. Asking why it is that Trudeau has not come clear, why Trudeau is taking on a relationship with India, which is an important country in the world, asking why the government of Canada is not taking more seriously a threat, which is also a threat to Canada. After all, if there are violent groups propagating violence, and you've seen some of the marches that these groups have taken out, glorifying the assassination of Indira Gandhi, putting up posters that talk about killing India, putting up posters with photographs of Indian diplomats, naming them, practically giving their addresses out, and talking about the fact that these are the people responsible for atrocities. Now, all of these threatening activities are actually extremely dangerous, not just for India and Indians who are in Canada, but for the wider a diaspora community. And I think it's more than 1 million in Canada now. Also, violence of any kind is dangerous for the host country. So why is Canada not taking it more seriously? And this is a question that local commentators have asked. There's a very famous journalist called Terry Milewski who has followed through the investigation into the bombing of the Air India Kanishka plane in 1985, where most of those who were on board may have been of Indian origin, but they were Canadian citizens going home or coming back home to meet family that is based here. Um, and he has followed that investigation and said consistently that as long as you don't crack down on those who are propagating violence on Canadian soil, that Canada itself is going to have a problem. So I think there's been that kind of pushback as well to the statements made by the Trudeau government. But by and large, from what I'm reading of the Canadian newspapers and commentariat, there has been a lot of unhappiness and a lot of other criticism of India has kind of been now brought into the debate over this.
I also saw reports in Indian media yesterday, of course, citing sources in the MEA of how Canadian diplomats had possible role in the farmers' protest, the Red Fort incident, and there was also an effort to bring in the Pakistan angle and talk about the ISI also hand in glove with the Khalistani elements and all of them planning this together. What do you make out of this, and what sort of a narrative is this setting?
Look, this is exactly why I feel that this rift between India and Canada is going to broaden before there is any attempt to try to bridge that divide. Because what you saw in the first 24 hours coming out of both capitals, from Ottawa and Delhi, seems to indicate that there is more to follow. So, from the Canadian side, if Prime Minister Trudeau said we're going ahead with this investigation, but he also talked about sovereignty issues, he talked about territorial integrity issues, he talked about international law being violated, the rule of law being violated, international norms being violated. Now, that seems to suggest that Canada plans to take this on a more international scale. On the other hand, from the Indian side, if you saw the Ministry of External Affairs put out two statements right at the beginning, one of them was on rejecting Trudeau's allegations and, in fact, saying that we have raised concerns with Canada for giving safe haven to all of these terrorists, wanted terrorists in India, and we have consistently asked them to crack down on those who are targeting the Indian community in Canada. But the second statement that talked about the expulsion of a Canadian diplomat actually also spoke about the fact that diplomats, in the plural, were involved in anti-India activities. Which means that the Indian government does plan to bring out more of this. I think you'll hear some more maybe later today itself as the Ministry of External Affairs holds a press conference. But I think it points in that direction that India is also looking to open up the debate to say, let's look at all the Canadian diplomats that are here and what kind of role they had. You spoke about the farmers' protest. It wasn't just diplomats about diplomats here. It was about Prime Minister Trudeau himself, who came out publicly and criticized the Modi government for its actions or trying to stop the protests during the erstwhile farm laws were being passed. Eventually, they were revoked. And when Trudeau responded sharply, there was a pushback from India at the time. Now we're talking, I think, about 2019 December, but there was a period of about 6 months where External Affairs Minister Jaishankar actually cancelled his appearance on a virtual meeting with the Canadian Foreign Minister. After that, we saw a number of diplomatic engagements between the two countries being frozen. So they went through that period of a freeze until about I think last year, when Prime Minister Modi in Germany on the sidelines of the G7 meeting met with Prime Minister Trudeau. They decided to do a reset. Then there was a plan for another reset when the Canadian Foreign Minister came to India once in February this year, once in March this year, talks about the free trade agreement back on track. Now, all of that is being reversed, if you like, by what we're seeing play out between the two governments and what you were pointing to, the Ministry of External Affairs now talking about looking at links between ISI and some of these groups, also looking at the links between diplomats and some of these groups, and also looking at the Canadian government itself that is not cracking down on these groups. So it really remains to be seen whether there is going to be a détente. Somebody is going to step in and try to bridge the differences between the two countries. But right now, it does seem like a declaration of diplomatic war.
Now, finally, I know you did say it'll probably get worse before it gets better. How do you see this de escalating? Because both countries have reached a point from where it's difficult to backtrack. So, what are the possibilities in front of both of these governments?
Look, in a sense, we are reinventing the wheel here because someone did decide in 2015, the government in India did decide that despite the fact that no assurances were being given on this issue of Khalistani supporters in Canada, India would try to set that aside and restart the relationship with Canada. So that decision was taken. There's a lot that India and Canada can benefit from when it comes to the bilateral relationship. There's trade, there's investment, there is civil nuclear cooperation between the two. There is actually, ironically, a lot that the two sides can share when it comes to counterterrorism. They are both countries that have dealt with terrorism in a sense, and there is a lot that they could share in terms of expertise. Canada, as I said, is an important part of the Western world, the NATO alliance, the G7, the Five Eyes alliance as well. India's relations with Canada are important. Apart from that, there's the huge diaspora, more than a million people who are Indian or of Indian origin in Canada that live and work there, study there, students going there every year. I think the Canadian numbers have grown year upon year. So there is a lot to gain from it. The question is going to be, are those bilateral pluses, if you like, going to be able to override this very, very big rift at the moment? You were asking how it might be de-escalated. I think, frankly, the problem does seem to have become a little personal at the top, given the fact that the two prime ministers themselves seem to have had a really bad meeting, and they seem to have obvious differences between the two. I mean, while the Indian Parliament was inaugurating the new Parliament the same day, if you like, Prime Minister Trudeau decided to make these allegations in the Canadian Parliament. It has become a little personal between the two, and it's possible that that's where there can be a possibility of a détente. But I think for the moment, there's a lot of hurt all around, but particularly on the Indian side, that this has been allowed to blow up when it should have actually been, there should have been a mechanism, given all the arenas of cooperation they have. And let's remember, last year, Canada put out an Indo Pacific strategy for Canada, which talked about India as a key ally, which talked about the importance of trade with India and investment in India. So it's not as if there aren't other issues that the two sides could try and build on. But for the moment, I think until this idea of a Canadian citizen who was wanted in India for terrorism, who was killed over there, this case is not completely, resolved, or enough evidence is put out, or one side says, "I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. I shouldn't have spoken so soon." Unless something moves over there, I think it's going to be a little difficult to see an immediate détente.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us and explaining the controversy as clearly as possible to our viewers. It is quite murky, and of course, we are being given reports through media, some of which are not even reliable. So it's very important when somebody like you comes out and puts it as it is. Thank you for joining us, Suhasini, and I hope that we can speak to you again through the course of this controversy.
Thank you to you and to all the viewers on News Minute as well.